Today I'm going to try and show off how to make a bead that has some delicate filigree on the surface. I'm going to assume that the people watching this know something about beadwork, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on things like how you shape a bead, but I will spend a little bit of time on it, so we are all agreed on how this whole thing works. So I've got a carbon paddle here. I have a titanium solder pick, and I've got some water in case anything goes wrong, or just in general. It's a good idea. So I have to work around my camera here. This is going to be a little bit weird, but I'm using Moretti white and Moretti Nile green because not that those are particularly good choices for a beautiful bead, but I happen to like the way that the Nile green comes out. It does some really pretty stuff in a strong reducing flame because you can actually reduce out the copper into elementals copper. So I wave the glass through the flame slowly to make sure that it doesn't fracture, blow little chunks of crap all over the place. I'm going to go ahead and run this down underneath so that I can get to it. So one of the critical things about doing a bead is that I, at least, work in the flame. I'm going to turn this down because it's just too hot. Softer flame. Okay, so I work in the flame with the glass, and I hold the bead, in this case, not yet a bead, underneath the flame. So I will heat up the glass so it's nice and warm, and I'll bring the mandrel up, touch it, bring it down out of the fire. This way the glass itself is not going to get as hot. Man, this is really hard to operate at this angle. And twist some glass off. White glass is really weird in that it goes transparent when it gets hot, so it's kind of hard to work with sometimes. But let's add some more to that because I want to have a nice big fat bead. So again, bring it up, touch it, and then unreel glass off of the hot mandrel. Critical thing here, when you get done pulling some glass off and you're ready to move to the next thing, don't pull the glass away. Come up, touch, unreel some glass, and pull the glass out and let the flame cut the glass loose. If you try and pull this out, you will never manage to pull it out hard enough or fast enough to actually get it clear of the bead. You'll pull out a little tiny piece of glass fiber, and that's not what you want. It's a futile thing. So always let the flame burn off the piece of glass that you just put on there. Okay, so this is really hot. I'm going to go ahead and run it down on my carbon paddle until I get a nice flat bead. Not really all that flat, but we're going to make it flat eventually. You hit back up again to smush it down a little bit further because I want to have a nice wide bead so that you can see what I'm doing here. That's not bad. Okay, so now we go with the Nile green. So this is a brand new end here, so it's going to flick crap all over the place. So I hold my bead up here in the top of the flame just to keep it warm, and I will preheat the end of this, which is broken off, and that's when they tend to flip stuff all over the place because they're full of little tiny cracks. It's not going to, so now move down into the flame. So I'm very slowly rotating my bead, and I'm very slowly rotating my piece of glass. This is a technique I learned a long time ago that, I don't know, it was Cindy Brown or Elizabeth Johnson or one of those other amazing people that I learned these things from, and they called it the emergency stringer technique. Stringer is fine glass, so I'm going to pull this glass out to make a piece of glass that's thin enough to stick on here. So get a piece that's nice and warm, get the tip of this warm, touch the two of them together. Oops, pulled it way too fast. Let's try that again. Touch the two of them together. let it cool for a little while, and then I start pulling. I'm out of the flame. That's okay. That's not as thick as I wanted, but it'll do for a demo. So now I choke way up on this until I'm almost at the point where I'm uncomfortable with the heat that's left. I heat my glass bead back up so the surface is warm. And then I'm going to turn this down so far that y'all are going to think that I don't actually have a flame left. But at least this way you can see it over top of the sodium flare. And this is super tricky. This is going to take you a while to learn, but it is doable. Man, I've got to put my, I have to take off my sodium glasses and put on my bifocals because I'm old and I can't see these things anymore. Okay, so reheat these things back up. Get in here, heat up the tip of my glass. Oops, too hot. It's already bending. Let's just pull that off, burn it off, put it back on. Let it cool down. So the first part of that was not at all what I was intending to do. I haven't done this in a while. And I've got a little piece of debris in my glass right there, so I'm just going to scrape that off and then go back right to where I was and start drawing back on the surface. So this is just like putting toothpaste on, I guess. I don't know. But you just lay a very thin strip on the surface, come around, finish, burn it off, and there's a bead with a little tiny funny squiggle on it, which is actually exactly what I wanted. I usually do a better job than this, but man, this angle that I'm working at is really difficult. So now let's turn this back up a little bit. And I'm going to burn this in gently. But burn it in, what I mean is I'm going to heat it up to the point where it fully melts into the surface of the bead, because I want to have the surface of the bead nice and hot for my next technique. So I talk too loud, and as a result I blow my flame all over the place. That's because I'm working with a really tiny flame, because I'm working with a really tiny bead. There we are. Now we've got it all nice and melted in. I'll flatten it out a little bit. Dip the titanium in the water just to make sure it's cool. So what I'm trying to do here is heat up the surface so it's warm enough to move under tension. Heat it back up. Maybe if I work at an angle, then things tend to droop down to the left, but you'll be able to see what I'm doing better. Flatten it back out. Heat it back up. So what I'm doing here is I'm dragging the surface, the titanium solder pick, across the surface. I'm not just rolling it, I'm dragging it. And if I do a good enough job of that, we'll get a nice little chevron, which is the whole point of this demo. Hope it comes out. So I'll heat it back up until it's nice and warm. Smoosh it back out. And yeah, you can see the chevron there. That's pretty much what I'd intended. So I'm going to heat it back up so that that last little tiny bit of notch in there isn't there. I'm going to knock, I'll just leave that on there. If I got a pair of pliers around here, I could just pop that end little weird bit off, but I don't need to do that. Okay, get it back hot. Now, the reason that I like using The Nile green is because it's a copper sulfate based glass colorant. So if I turn the oxygen almost all the way off, this is a heavily reducing flame. I hit it with this for a while. It'll actually reduce the copper out onto the surface, and I'll get all these little brown stripes in the middle of the green, and it's really cool looking. And that's done. So I'll hold it up here to just let it cool off for a little while. And there's the finished bead. That's about how it'll look. And now I'll stash it in the, gee, I can't even find it, in the insulation that I use to cool these things down slowly. And we'll call that done.